who gets the paycheck from dad and all the kids. When they come in, they say, where's the money? Goes into the family account and is invested. That's an organization. But the family as such is an institution. It's a set of expectations about human behavior. Those institutions create or shape the incentives that we face. You get rewarded or punished. You make profits or losses. And those incentives shape our behavior. So institutions shape incentives and incentives shape behavior. So let's look at some of those institutions and incentives. Let's start with this picture. A little hard to see here. Can anyone tell me what this is?
Korean Peninsula.
Okay. Anyone else? It's the Korean Peninsula. But what kind of picture of the Korean Peninsula?
It shows the south is lit up at night. It shows the Korean Peninsula at night.
That's
the
right.
The south is lit up and the north is completely
Right.
dark.
It's a picture taken by an extremely tall person. Standing way over the Korean Peninsula and taking a picture. And so we can ask, what incentives do people have to create light? This is a very interesting example. Some people say you cannot develop economically if you've been colonized, for example. Post-colonial societies cannot develop. Well, Korea was colonized by Japan. You may recall the Japanese Empire was astonishingly brutal in its treatment, especially of the Koreans. They wanted to extinguish and wipe out a Korean culture. The language was suppressed. People were to learn Japanese. There was systematic rape of Japanese women, Korean women, the so-called comfort women of the Japanese army. It was really astonishing brutality in both North and South. Some people say, well, it's your religion, well, or your ethnicity. These are the same population, but they're separated by two different sets of institutions. One of light. If you look, by the way, there's a little dot here on the Chinese border. This is the free trade zone. The only light you can find in North Korea. So what is it then that induces people to engage in the production and exchange of value? Well, first, property rights. They create incentives for cooperation and wealth creation. But they have to take three characteristics are necessary for them to do that. And in English, it's very convenient, we can identify them as the 3 Ds. They have to be definable. We have to be able to define property so I know what is yours and what is mine. This tends to avoid conflict as well, because I know what belongs to you, what belongs to me. If I want what you have, I have to bargain with you or offer you something to get you to part with it. So definable, and again, the most important is property rights and land as the foundation. People talk about property rights and ideas. That's interesting on the frontier. If your society does not have well-defined property rights and land, you're likely to be poor. And you see that in China. The difference between urban China and rural China is a difference of property rights. Rural Chinese people do not have property rights that are saleable in their land. And when you travel in China, which I really recommend if anyone has not been to China, it's a wonderful, fascinating society to see how it's been transformed. You go to Guangzhou, Shenzhen, you feel like you're in a very rich area. It's like Southern California in so many ways. In fact, the Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou, I told the people there, I said, I feel very much like I'm at Stanford University, partly because all the students are Chinese, but also because it just feels like Stanford University. It's a rich, rich area, wealthy university. But travel 200 kilometers and go to rural China, and you're in third world poverty. The difference is property rights. It's really a great example of that. But they also have to be defendable, not just on paper. This is the problem with formal titling procedures around the world. IMF, World Bank, UN comes and says, we're going to create a paper system of property rights, but they're not defendable in court. There's no mechanism for you to defend your property rights. They can be confiscated. Again, a very serious problem for rural China, because property is systematically confiscated by urban governments, the property of rural farmers, transformed into urban land, and they're expelled. They don't have a right they can take to a court of law and defend their right to their property and force someone to pay money. This is, by the way, changing in China. The authorities recognize the danger of this and are beginning to institute transfer of property rights and land slowly, and also some legal rights of farmers against confiscation. So the trend is in the right direction, much too slow, in my opinion. And finally, they must be divestable. You need a legal system that allows me to divest myself, which means to transfer it, transferable. I need to have a legal system that allows me to give it to someone, to leave it in a will to my children in a clear, unambiguous legal statement, to sell it, and so on. Which means the legal system needs to function. This is a very important role of government, is to provide the legal infrastructure. Or as William Niskanen, an economist at the Cato Institute, puts it, the soft infrastructure of the free society. Not the hard infrastructure, right? Buildings and so on. Free markets produce those very well. The soft infrastructure, the legal system, the legal framework. And similarly, here's another area that needs to be attended to. Many legal systems around the world, the formal legal system of the state, are very costly. They're corrupt. The judges, you have no choice. You go to the judge of the state legal system, and he demands bribes. They're very difficult to gain access to. The state is not doing its job properly. Simple example, countries where there's a legal monopoly of lawyers, you need a lawyer to form a legal will. Guatemala is an example of that. So poor people do not have a legal will to leave behind their assets. What happens? Endless fighting in the family over who gets the boat or the donkey or the house or whatever. In the US and Canada, if you want to form a will, you go to a stationery store and you pay $1, which is almost nothing for income, to buy a piece of paper. You fill it out. I give my donkey to my nephew, I give my boat to my son, and I give my house to my daughter. Right? Easy. Have 3 people sign it, it's a legal will. It is defendable in any court in the country. That's low-cost legal services. In Guatemala, you have to go to a lawyer, a notary, have seals and forms and gigantic ribbons put on it. Only rich people have wills. Poor people can't afford them. The easiest way to create a will now in the US is you go online, just something called willmaker.com. And you pay about $20 and it makes a will, and you have it signed, and it's a perfectly valid legal will. You don't need a lawyer for it. Now, freedom to produce and exchange creates the most powerful incentives for wealth creation. I want to look at some examples. The Fraser Institute of Canada has an annual measure, the Economic Freedom of the World Report, and they've come up with a series of metrics to measure economic freedom, including ease, access to property rights, ability to transfer them without paying bribes and so on, having a legal system that functions, not being confiscated through hyperinflation, and so on and so forth. And here's what they did. They divide up the world into quartiles, 25%,